Welcome to Trial to Triumph, hosted by Caleb Johnson, the show about leaning into life's constant testing on your way to realizing your biggest blessings.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Caleb Johnson, host of From Trial to Triumph, and I am very, very excited to have this conversation with you today. We're going to be talking about financial markets and commercial lending specifically. So that is one part of my day-to-day life that I need to be kind of tuned into, and it's always a great privilege to have really professional people in my corner like Dan here today. So we're going to hear a little bit about Dan's story and just some things that he's learned from going in this business, and then how that translates to newer investors as well. So, Dan, welcome to the show, brother. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me today, Caleb. Great to be with you.
Yeah, man. Really excited to have this conversation with you. And Dan, can you go ahead and give our listeners just a quick background story about yourself?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm born and raised here in Phoenix, Arizona. I was one of the rare natives, so I've never actually left the state outside of just vacationing and whatnot. So it's just been a fantastic opportunity to see how much growth we've had in the market, and just watching the trends has just been it's just enlightening to watch where, Scottsdale, Phoenix, the metro area has kind of come from the 1990s till now. So it's just been fantastic. And I went to ASU for college, and then also went to Thunderbird School of Global Management for my master's degree. And now I'm here at Integrity Capital. I'm the vice president of sales here, and it's just been a great journey to get to know apartment investors and some different assets. We also focus on our industrial and triple net retail.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, cool, man. And so talking about you specifically, whenever you're closing a transaction, what is one of the most challenging things that you find whenever it comes to so you sign the agreement with the buyer and they're going to get funding for this acquisition. And from then until closing, a lot of things happen. So what are some of the most challenging things that you have seen happen kind of in that time window?
Yeah, so sometimes the most challenging things are properties change, right? And that doesn't mean the property physically changes, but management changes, where sometimes occupancy changes or different things pop up through due diligence. And you kind of have to be really proactive about approaching those items going into a deal, so that you don't have too many of the last minute hiccups or potential opportunities to really blow things up. So one big thing is I always like to just get an assessment of the property, what we're working with, what market it's in. We do serve nationwide, and different markets come with different challenges. Those can be tornadoes, they could be earthquakes, they could be really anything. And so you just want to make sure the property's occupancy, at least from the get-go, is above 85%, just to kind of give you that window of difference there in case something does change. A lot of times what I see is we'll go into a deal with 90% occupancy, and the next month we get the reporting, it comes in at 80 or 75, and we're almost wondering what happened, right? So just because a property's under contract does not mean you can slow your speed up. You got to keep it going, and also just maintain that management process.
Wow, yeah, I'm glad you said that, because we just ran into that with one of our properties where the broker that we were buying it, who was helping us on the transaction, he said, yeah, they were like 88%, and they had some applications, so they were going to get to 90, and so we were going to go agency debt, which requires 90% or higher for 3 months at least, and or average of 90% or higher, and like 3 weeks, a month into it, we get another rent roll, and they're at like 75% occupancy. So a 15% decline, and that just throws the agency out the window, and it's pretty challenging. And what I found that you just kind of have to roll with the punches, and how you overcome that is you just negotiate. If you can negotiate and have a contingency in the contract that says, hey, if occupancy falls below this line, then something happens where we either have more time, or we at least have 3 months for that occupancy to come back up. Something happens. Otherwise, you need a price cut to kind of help, because rates will be higher, interest rates will be higher if you have to go with another lender compared to agency generally. Dan, is there anything else that you see that you might be able to do to actually overcome that hurdle if that does happen?
Yeah, so some of the things that I always recommend are try to be as close to that management company as you can be going into the contract, just to get a feel for who they are, get a feel for their background, how long they've been managing the property for, and really just do your due diligence on them as well, because you're not only doing due diligence on the property, but you're also doing due diligence on the management. And so that will have a huge impact on where the deal ends up going, if it works out or not. And so that's another recommendation I have generally. And then if you also have, as a buyer, if you have a property management company that you also have in mind, maybe try to see what their opinions are, how they look at the market, how their strategy would be, or whatever that looks like, to kind of get a different perspective as well.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, I'm glad you said that. Now, whenever someone, let's say a first-time apartment complex buyer, they are getting into this business in the syndication space, and they contact you, right? And they say, "Hey, Dan, I'm blah blah blah, and I'm green, and so I just want to introduce myself, get to know you a little bit better." And what information, when that first contact occurs, what information do you look for from that potential buyer?
It's a great question, and it happens often, and that's the beauty of this industry, is that everyone starts somewhere, right? And that's what's so exciting about it, and that's what I love, is helping people fulfill their dreams. That's why I do this. And the first question I'll always ask is, well, what experience do you have? And is that from a business ownership? Is that from being a W-2 employee? Or have you done single family rentals? What exactly, where have you started? Because then that'll give me a pinpoint to figure out what I can do to potentially guide them or provide them that consultative efforts to get them to where they're trying to go. And so generally speaking, that's where I start. With that being said, I've heard anything from, hey, we've done single family rentals, now we're looking at, and we've kind of built our way up to fourplexes. We don't really know what financing or what the process looks like to get into the 5 units or more. And so my biggest recommendation is, with new investors, first, don't be afraid, because fear will hold you back, and if you just have to start somewhere. Second, identify the who. Who is it that you trust? Who can you really lean on that can help give you that guidance to be successful as an apartment owner? Great examples are Caleb. Caleb's done it. He has the experience. He can give you the experience all from A to Z. He's been through the process full cycle, and those are great who's, right? And then also, if you don't want to have a syndication or a group that you're kind of working with as far as the GP goes, what you can also do is, I would say, start small. Just start with a 5 unit, work your way up to 10, work your way up to 20, and just kind of have those stair steps on your way up. And as you kind of start building more and more experience, that'll give you an opportunity to then keep evolving your portfolio. And there's so many clients I had that started at 10 and now they're at 300. It's really amazing to see that evolution come through.
Wow, that's awesome. I'm glad you said that. And also on the fact that, everyone starts from somewhere. And to remember that, it can be pretty daunting when you're starting off from maybe with nothing, no investing experience, with maybe residential only, and then jumping into commercial. It could feel pretty daunting, but you were 100% right that you're going to start somewhere, and if you don't start now, then when are you actually going to start? Right. Now, I'm curious, how often do newer investors actually contact you? Like, is there a certain call per day that you get 5 times a day? I'm going to get this phone call, I know, or how often, kind of in general?
It depends on the market, to be honest with you. I found that over the last couple of years, I started seeing a lot more of that. Now, not as much. I think just given things are shifting in the market in general, with interest rates being elevated slightly, and we're just in a different kind of a market right now where I think it's more conservative as far as trying something new. But there still are individuals and clients I have that are starting to build their way up, where they've kind of built they started in the Airbnb space, and they went to fourplexes, and now they're ready to make that leap. And it's I would say probably about, if I was to give you an average per week, it's probably about like 5 to 8% right now in this market. So not too many, but there's definitely some people dipping their toes trying to learn more.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Good. And if someone is thinking about working with you and they're brand new again, how can they make your life easier? Let's say they don't have an opportunity yet, but is there something they can do that can make your life easier when they actually do bring you an opportunity?
Absolutely. So there's actually a whole process I usually like to go through with new sponsors. And the first thing starts with just really getting to know them, their experience level. We kind of covered that already. The next thing is really, I always say, hey, what is your credit history? Like, is there anything we should be concerned about from your past history of owning properties? Have you ever had foreclosures, bankruptcies? I always call them the skeletons in the closet. Just let it out there. Let me know what happened. And sometimes we feel that 7 years or beyond, it doesn't matter. It actually does. And I always say, at any point, have you ever had a bankruptcy, foreclosure, late pay, any judgments, or any legal things that we should be aware of? Just because those, that can impact a deal. And so we want to make sure that we get ahead of all that in the beginning of the process. And so it's really just to get to know you, and also feel free to share with me and be authentic, but also know that it's not me judging you. It's more just trying to get a feel for how I can best serve you. And with that being said, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Yeah, and then we kind of go into the personal financial statement, which will highlight how much cash the investor has on hand, how much liabilities they have. That just kind of gives me a snapshot of them as a borrower. That really just gives me a good idea of what I'm working with as far as affordability. So what should we be targeting? Are you overshooting? Are you undershooting? Or what makes best sense for you and where you're at as far as financially? And then some other items I ask for generally are the tax returns personally. I usually like to see 3 years of history, 3 years of business tax returns if you own any entities, and then also any, like, if you do happen to have a property, the rent roll and T12 are always a really good thing to have as well.
Okay. Now, Dan, if there is someone that they've had some maybe bad credit, foreclosure, bankruptcy, late payments, is it possible to get lending with that? And if it is, how do you kind of get around that?
Sure. Now, it is possible. I always like to look at the history of what happened. So there's always an explanation. Are you first accountable for it? Was it, hey, the market turned and I walked away because I didn't want to make payments anymore? Or was it, hey, I really tried to make it work with the lender. Although we went in default, we found a solution and I paid back the lender. I was whole at the end of it. It really just depends on what the circumstances were, and I always like to hear that story because that helps us create a better story around what we could be doing to help you. Now, if your credit score is 680 and below, that's usually the threshold that we're going to have trouble to find a solution for you. With that, there are ways to overcome it. First, we could look at either private money options, which are generally higher interest. We could also, going back to the who concept, we could try to partner you with another partner that has really good squeaky clean credit. They could kind of be the person that helps you as you kind of work through that credit issues, as you try to appropriate everything, get things moving back to a good standing per se, hit that 680 threshold and above. And there's also different strategies that we can also look at as far as just maybe having you start with another syndication group as you kind of build your credit back up, or there's a couple different options out there, but I would not lose hope if you don't have the credit we're looking for, because there are solutions.
Oh, that's good to know, because a lot of the people I think that will be listening to this, they maybe they have good credit, maybe it's below that 680, and they will be looking at for other partners, right? And so if that's the case, usually the other partner or sponsor, the person that's going to be signing the note, that sponsor, well, really their job is to make sure they have good credit and they have liquidity and net worth requirements. And so almost all the time, and again, you please share your experience with that, but almost all the time, if they're finding that sponsor to work with, that sponsor is going to be able to qualify for the loan even without, let's say, this newer investor having bad credit. Is that fair?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Now, Dan, I'm sure you've seen a lot in this industry, and I'd love to talk about some of those crazy stories that you've seen, but what is one big mistake you see newer investors make when it comes to lending?
Yeah, so one of the mistakes I've seen are kind of going too big too fast, where you have this vision that you want to really just grow your portfolio as fast as possible, and sometimes that means doing whatever it takes to do that. And that could be overpaying, getting the wrong type of debt on your property, not having a business plan you can truly execute with the appropriate experience level. There's definitely been some barriers, especially now that have been exposed, because as we all know, there has been some floating rate bridge debt that has kind of gotten in the way of accomplishing the appropriate business plans to really execute. So with newer investors, I always say, don't be afraid to make the leap, but also make sure you're comfortable with where you're at to be able to then take that next step, just so that you don't find yourself playing from behind.
Yeah. Now, how does someone know that they're comfortable? And the reason I ask that is because there is a point where it's I say this with all the love, but there's a point where it's stupid and you bite off way more than you can chew. And there's also a point where you need to be a little uncomfortable so that you can actually grow, right? Because if you just stay where you're at all the time and you're never uncomfortable, that's a good sign that you're kind of, you're not going to grow that much. Okay. And so how do you understand, how do you think people can tell if the risk they're taking is maybe calculated risk compared to it being a seriously large mistake?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. In entrepreneurship, you're going to make mistakes. That's a given. It's okay to fail. You fail forward. Now, some things that I could share with you include at least have 2 years of experience full cycle. That means from acquisition to then getting to the process of fulfilling your business plan, getting the rents where they need to be, and then also either refinancing or selling the property. I always say 2 years is a good amount of time that you could really just be in a property and just own it, absorb it, figure out those kinks, and build your team out. Even if it's a property management company, if it's part of a syndication group or whatever that is, just have a couple years under your belt. That way at least you understand how the model works. It's not as easy as, all right, I have 10 tenants right now in this 10-unit property. It's going to be really easy. It's not easy. Once you start, you're going to realize it's very challenging and it's hard work, but it really is fulfilling work.
Gotcha. Okay. So from my understanding, you're kind of saying start small, right? And if you start small, start with a partner, because you'll always have to start somewhere, right? Even if everyone starts with nothing, no experience. But start small, and then from there, before biting off the 100-unit, bite off the 10 or 15, 20-unit, have a partner with there, and then scale to the larger complexes. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, gotcha. Now, Dan, whenever it comes to actually qualifying for one of these loans, I know there's generally a net worth requirement, meaning the investor or general partnership team needs to be worth a certain amount of capital for qualification. They also need to have liquidity requirements, meaning some money in stocks or cash, whatever that looks like. And then also experience, right? If they're going to get a loan for this, then there needs to be some type of experience generally. And Can you go into a little bit about if I'm missing any requirements for qualification, if you can share what those are, and also whenever it comes to like net worth, liquidity, experience, kind of ballpark, what do you see as being the real norm whenever it comes to qualifying for one of these loans?
Sure. So let's start with the net worth and liquidity requirements. So net worth needs to be, and this is where that personal financial statement comes in so handy. So then we can get a snapshot of where you're at. The net worth needs to be equal to or more than the loan amount, right? So that's net worth after, assets minus liabilities. And then your liquidity position needs to have at least 10% liquidity post-closing. So I always say shoot for 10 to 15% just to have that buffer. And when I mean liquidity, it's really cash you have access to today if you needed it. Sometimes where we find uncertainty there is I have money in these securities and I have to wait 30 days to access it. That doesn't count as liquidity because you have to wait a certain amount of time to access it. So I would say liquidity means money you can put your hand in the pot and grab it today and go spend it tomorrow or even today. The experience level, it goes back to owning and owning an asset of that sort. Maybe if it's through the agency debt programs, they always like to see 2 years at least owning and managing a property, or at least having a property manager, and you've also been one of the primary owners on the GP side. So that's usually like the requirement as far as experience goes. I always say the more experience the better, and you're going to get that experience just having the right group that's guiding you and really mentoring you. And everyone starts somewhere. So even if you're working with a GP on a lesser scale, at least you're building that experience. And I always say start your bio as soon as possible, because there's going to be so many things you learn and you absorb that you're going to potentially forget to highlight or pinpoint about yourself. So I would say don't be afraid to start that resume and bio as soon as you start your journey in multifamily, because there's going to be a lot of things that you can really pass down to others, but also highlight about yourself, what you've learned, and even share your failures. It's okay to fail, because those failures are what lead to the future successes.
I'm glad you said that. That's really, really good. Now, Dan, whenever it comes to creating a bio, which is a resume, let's say if someone they're coming out of college, or maybe they're still going through college, they're early 20s, and they don't really have any experience. What things should they look for to actually put in that bio? It's really easy whenever we have a lot of experience to fill up that bio, but for people just starting off, it can. And I've experienced it starting off. It's kind of hard to put what do I put in there? I mean, I was in JROTC in high school. I was on the football team. That's all I got. So what are some things that you think they should include in there?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think a lot of times we discount our transferable skill sets that we can leverage in those positions. So being on a football team, what have you learned being in the football team? How to play on a team first and foremost, how to lead people, how to win. So there's a lot of different aspects that you'll have to pinpoint. Those transferable skills are huge, and don't be afraid to pinpoint those, because ultimately when you're building a multifamily portfolio, you also have to build a team. And the people on your team are going to be the people that you lean on. And I always say, lean on each other's strengths and protect each other's weaknesses. And what that means is you're not always going to be the best person at one certain thing, but someone else on your team probably will be, and that's okay. Let them run that part of the show.
That's good. Now, Dan, I guess I should have started off with this actually, but so your role specifically is a broker lender, meaning, like you said, you're nationwide, and you can shop thousands of banks, maybe less, maybe more, but a lot of different banks to actually find the right bank for that right market, because certain banks can't lend in different markets, from my understanding, and also for the specific opportunity that this buyer is trying to close, matching and pairing the bank that's a good fit with that exact property and the sponsorship team. And is there anything else you would maybe define as your role?
Yeah, so it's really the way I would best define my role is being a capital consultant that specializes in supporting your finance goals in multifamily, industrial, and triple net properties. And what part of what makes us as a firm unique is our ability to provide strategic structuring, remarkable relationship alignment, and exceptional follow through. Those are the big three things that we're really trying to add value to you and our clients in the process.
Awesome. Yeah. And what would you say, there's a couple ways that people can get funding that I've used and leveraged. Sometimes that's going directly to a regional bank. If I'm buying a property in Dallas, Texas, I can call up 15 regional banks that are kind of local in that market, smaller banks, and call them up and try to find the multifamily consultant there and work through them. Or I could just call you, and I don't need to call 15 other people, and you can actually go nationwide. And now, Dan, what would you say are some of the benefits of working with you compared to actually going with a regional bank?
Yeah. So here's the thing. I always say the right deal that makes sense for you is the direction you should always go. Now, not every deal makes sense to each regional bank either. And so that will create a tougher financing experience, right? And the goal here is to make the financing a happy experience. We want to try to make it the best for you and what makes sense for you and what you're looking for. So I would say regional banks do have their place. There's a whole lot of value in them. You know, if it's a small market, they'll understand that market better than any other bank would nationwide, right? So there is a time and a place to leverage those regional banks. And I agree, they have their value. They also do have their perks that come with them. They understand the market. But then there's also times where they have a really tight appetite for certain types of assets. So maybe they're not focused on multifamily, but they're more focused on owner-occupied properties or properties that are retail triple net or industrial. So you have to keep in mind that every bank has their box, and they also have lending limits. And sometimes you'll max out that lending limit before you know it, and then you're kind of stuck scrambling. And so our value proposition is, instead of you having to go to every bank, knock on the door and ask for who the right person is, we already have a team dedicated to identifying lenders, what they're doing, what their focuses are. We have established relationships for 20 plus years. We know who's doing what, and we know when environments change, who's also doing what. And that is where our value comes in. We can close deals even in tough markets. We know our craft. And part of that strategic structuring is we want to provide you with solutions in order to accommodate your needs with that relationship alignment and exceptional follow through.
Awesome. And I will say, Dan, you are an amazing guy, an amazing lender, an amazing resource for people to have in their back pocket. And you have been tremendous help for opportunities that we've closed, opportunities that we've worked on. And even though we haven't closed everyone together, it has been such a valuable resource to have you as that person that can kind of help us along that journey. So I would definitely attest that having you as someone that can help us close these transactions is amazing. And you're an amazing guy for that. So, and also thank you for being here on the show. It's been awesome kind of picking your brain and asking you these questions.
Thank you, Caleb. It's an honor and privilege to be here, and you're a fantastic person. And also, it's just a joy to call you a client. So thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Well, I ask every guest the same 3 questions, Dan, just to wrap up and close. Now, the first one is a book recommendation. So if you could recommend a book to our listeners, what would that be?
So the book we've been kind of going through here at the firm is Good to Great by James Collins. It's just, I read it about 5 or 6 years ago, and it just really stuck with me. And there's so many concepts in it that have just resonated. Just really having the right people on the bus. So it just kind of goes into that multifamily alignment with how do you get the right people on your bus to be able to grow from 4 units to 300 units. So I think that's a great book to read.
Yeah, I actually was recently reading that one, and it is a really good one. Especially I can see that meshing well with Integrity Capital, right, for the next 15 years to grow to an amazing amount. And it's such a good book for business in general. So good. And Dan, if people want to maybe learn more about you and work with you, what's the best place or best way they can do that?
Sure. So first and foremost, our website is integrity-capital.com. And then my email is dan.zlaket, ZLAKET, at integrity-capital.com. My phone number is 602-349-8373. Reach out to me anytime.
Awesome. And I'll have that all in the show notes as well. And lastly, the third question is, Dan, if you can share one final thing with our listeners that they can take away from today's show, what would that be?
The one final thing I would say is everyone starts somewhere. Don't be afraid to jump in feet first and enjoy the journey along the way. You're going to learn, you're going to grow, and also share your small wins. Each little win will lead to the big, giant prize. So we make sure you celebrate those along the way, because it's going to be challenging, but it's going to be well worth it.
Yeah, I like that. Well, Dan, thanks again for joining us today and investing some of your time with us. And to all the listeners who tuned in, it was a pleasure for you to spend your time with us. Catch you next time.
It's time to grab your victory. Find us on the web at redseacapitalgroup.com and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Red Sea Capital Group.